sometimes I talk about like when you get the inkling, our inkling was just, let's do something to encourage people. And then it moves to bread on the trail, like where all of a sudden something is on the trail where you go, oh, I'm going to pick that up because I think God dropped that there. So, and I'd say after bread on the trail hits, at some point you go to work. So as soon as that building was given to us, then the next 10 months was just 8-12 hours a day doing renovation. But even then I had no idea that this would become what it was becoming. I wasn't thinking Kingdom Ecosystem. I wasn't thinking Brave Cities. I did not know Taylor at that point. I didn't know how to do coffee. I didn't know how to do any food or restaurant, but we knew that we would create some type of a multi-use sort of place where people could connect and at least get a cup of coffee.
Well, welcome to Gray Papers with the Brave Cities crew. Here today with Hugh, Halter, and Taylor McCall, and then myself, John Dengler. We have been thinking about kind of some of the topics that we want to cover in these episodes, and thought it'd be a good place to start with the kind of spark that began some of these ideas. At the beginning of any kind of Brave City story, there is maybe an inkling of something. And so I wanted to ask you guys today to share. I guess I'll just say, hey, Taylor, why don't you share first, just for sake of order here? But like, what can you tell a little bit about like the initial inspiration or spark, or where you felt like, man, things really have to, like, we got to do something different. Things need to change. Just share a little bit of that story. I think that'd be helpful for folks kind of taking this journey with us to kind of like, let's just start at the beginning.
Yeah. So is this like order of importance?
What do you mean? You could do order of importance, order of occurrence.
I'm saying, I'm going first.
I get it. Obviously.
Yeah. Obviously any of you guys can relate to this, that this journey can't be linear. There's not necessarily a revelatory moment where you go, all right, now I'm going to make this decision. So I'm going to try to bob and weave in and out of my own story and how the pieces came together. I think my initial personal encounter or experience with Jesus, as we would call it, is really significant. So I'm a young man, maybe a senior in high school, and I have this revelation of a God who loves me and kind of is calling me out of a life of confusion and maybe debauchery and whatnot. And so all I know in this moment, and I can kind of share the deeper details of that story later, but all I know in this moment is that I need to seek after him. I guess to know Jesus is the pursuit. And that season or that the next couple of years of my life was really marked by a lack of structure, or a lack of, I would say, maybe a better word would be a lack of institution. It was just a pure pursuit. I really didn't have an understanding of, the Christian industrial complex. I really didn't have an understanding of the church as we know it. I definitely knew that I wanted to go to church. I had an experience with, Sunday morning gatherings and things like that. I'm not trying to say I was coming out of a life of being unchurched, but I didn't understand that, how everything tied together in the world of Christianity. And so myself and a group of young people, we just kind of started seeking God. And that led me to quickly changing my plans of what I was going to do after high school. I decided that I wanted to know God more, and I wanted to know people who knew him. So I ended up changing schools and changing majors. I was kind of on a pursuit of maybe athletics and athletic training and things like that, and changed that to basically Bible and music, which
wow.
Yeah,
Really?
have been
terrible to me.
More confusing. Couldn't have been more confusing to the people who knew me and who were around me. The two things that were of no interest in my life up until this point. But interestingly, it wasn't terrible. It was an incredible pursuit, but it also led me deep into institutional waters. Led me deep into the Christian industrial complex, deep into what we would call like.
By the way, 1 minute on the industrial complex for those that maybe never heard that. How would you describe that?
Well, how would you describe
it? Everything being about church, like what they see on a Sunday. Would that be accurate? I
would say the Christian industrial complex is kind of where Babylon and kingdom become synchronized, where like money and Jesus become one and the same. How do we corporatize the good news of the kingdom? Make it a consumeristic product.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
I guess maybe. So I think that just became a reality to me over the next 4 years. Like, how do we sell this thing? How do we monetize it? How do we make it palatable to consumers? Because this thing has to make money. It has to produce some kind of resource. So that's phase 2. And then we'll move into like when the Inklings started to happen for me. Over the next, I guess, 10 years, I put my life into that world because I thought that was where I was going to find, the pure outpouring of being what you would think of as a disciple or a servant of Jesus. And the reality is I just didn't find it. I kept hitting walls, kept finding myself confused by that architecture, by that kind of the westernized infrastructure of Christendom. And I knew that I wanted out, but didn't know how or what way or where to go. And I do want to say, just for the sake of my ministry brothers and sisters, it wasn't that I wanted out of this kind of going back 10 years to that pure pursuit of knowing God and others knowing God. I wanted out of what I refer to as a Christian industrial complex. And I started to see Jesus kind of calling us out of that. And there's this one particular idea that a writer in the scriptures says, in the book of Revelation, he says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which is like another idea for empire. And he says, come out of her lest you take part in her sins. And that, along with the life of Jesus, the parables of Jesus, and, seeing how society functions, seeing how people live their lives in the market space, in the social space, and where their neighborhoods were, seeing where the poor were being almost completely excluded from the work of Jesus, other than mercy ministries in cities all over the world, seeing where the widow and the fatherless were pushed to the margins of everyday life. Again, unless it was some kind of like ministry project, but everyday life. I knew I had to come out of that model and find Jesus in everyday life again. And so that's when the kind of the idea of the kingdom city coming to earth as it is in heaven started to become a reality in my mind. I would say now I'm 13 years into that experiment. So it being a reality in my everyday life is still a pursuit. But it being a reality in my mind, how can the kingdom of heaven reign in my home, my community, my market space, not as like a little missional candlelight in my market space, but it be the kind of controlling aspect of my market space, and in my social spaces, where I drink, where I work out, where I socialize. How can the kingdom come in those places was really the pursuit from that moment on.
So question, so when you left the typical church staff, you were leaving in kind of a deconstructive way, but you would say you weren't thinking Brave City ideology or even theology at that point, but you were just feeling like there had to be more. Would that be accurate?
That's all.
Okay.
No knowledge of what to do. I mean, truly like throwing my hands up. Practically, I resigned from a position that was lucrative and enjoyable. I was good at it. I still feel like I was probably better at that than anything I've done since. I still feel like I'm fumbling around in the dark half the time trying to figure out what to do. I had been trained, when you go to school, to undergrad and graduate school for those things, you're just so well trained in them. Preaching, teaching, worship leading, building environments of connecting to each other in Jesus, all that stuff. So moving out of that world, giving up that paycheck, giving up that stability was definitely, it was scary, but it was also kind of foolish. Like, what are you going to do? And that's what we did. We sold our house, or we left our house. We actually ended up not being able to sell it, but we left our house, moved into a place where we felt like we could be near the marginalized of our city, and we wanted to have some kind of access to them. That was kind of based on Jesus's idea in Matthew 25 that where they are, that's where I am. Yeah. So we're like, well, we want to go where they are. And the whole concept was what Hugh said. There's got to be more. And the only thing we know to do to find what's more is to take one step. So I'll land the plane with this. I think that's a big problem, or a big wall I see in a lot of folks' lives, is they want to know what the next 5 steps are. And I'm fairly convinced that that's not offered to us. Usually it's no, you got to be desperate enough or obsessed enough to say, I just know I can't do this anymore. Yeah. And sometimes that comes at a cost. Sometimes it doesn't. Usually it means you're going to have to pick up a hammer and figure out, what that proverbial skill that you have how it can be used in the world to better the world. But that's where the inkling started for me, is come out of her lest you take part in her sins. I realized that I had fully embedded myself in the synchronization of Babylon and kingdom, and I couldn't be in that world anymore.
This is great. I'm so glad we decided to take these in kind of the initial bites of our story. Hugh, why don't you do the same, man? I want to where did this begin to catch spark in your own heart and mind?
Yeah, a little bit different story. We had planted a church in Portland, Oregon, and then did another plant in Denver. So I was never on staff in what you call a traditional set. We were just always planting. And so, and then our son had a really severe epilepsy condition. So we, from the Denver store, we found this spot out here in Alton where he wanted to go live. And so we put him out here. And so that became kind of why we ended up out here. So you can tell it wasn't for any vision. It was just, we were trying to deal with our son's physical need. But we were sensing that my leadership was coming to an end in the Denver story. That was the Tangible Kingdom book that we kind of chronicled that story. But as my wife and I would come out here and visit Ryan, we just started to, I wouldn't say we fell in love with the city. We were just super curious about why it seemed so like it just had a struggle that we didn't see in Denver. And our church plant in Portland was pretty multi-ethnic, black-white scenario. So we were drawn to the struggle of the city and the demographics of the city. And so long story short, we moved here only because my wife said, why don't we sell the farm in Denver and move here and see if we can do something to help the town. So to her, it was a question of like, look, we're living in a nice part of Denver. We're almost done with about a 14-year run on church plant number 2. Let's see if we can do something crazy. So that was kind of the conversation we had with our entire family, my 2 daughters who were mid-20 somethings, and then one brand new husband, one engaged fiance. We all had a big talk together about coming out here. We knew Ryan would not live that long. So some of it was about Ryan, like, hey, we should, we'd be closer to him. But it really wasn't about him. We actually said he probably is going to die. So we don't want to have to turn around and come back. So we just had kind of the sense that we would love to do something to help the town out. So we came out here all together, literally, started buying up crappy houses and renovating, and all right downtown. And I remember one coffee with Cheryl, I said, so remind me again why we're here. What are we doing? And we literally talked about, okay, what would be our goal if we stay here? And the only word that we could come up was encouragement. Let's do something to encourage the town. So we were not thinking plant a 3rd church at all. I figured we'd probably find some church planters and maybe like be elders, but we were really thinking like, what could we do to encourage the town? I also was at a different season than, Taylor and Lindsay were starting off. How old were you when you left the church staff? 29. So we were mid 40s,
30 maybe.
And we're tired at this point. We've done
we did that.
Built 2 communities and a lot of effort. So I was at that season where I was literally telling God, please don't ask me to lead or do another thing. I tried to, our town, we couldn't find a cup of coffee. So I remember the very first thing I did, I tried to buy a little gas station that was boarded up right down on our main Broadway street. And the deal fell through. Walked 1 block up to our house and told Cheryl, used some bad words, but so that old sucker didn't take my price. And she's like, well, why don't we chill out for a year? So like, let's not make a move too quick. So I said, great idea. And then 2 hours later, some guy called me I didn't really know at all and offered me a building. So I tried to buy a building, no. And then a couple hours later, after sort of going, yeah, let's just not do anything, that happened. So sometimes I talk about like when you get the inkling, our inkling was just, let's do something to encourage people. And then it moves to bread on the trail. Like where all of a sudden something is on the trail where you go, oh, I'm going to pick that up because I think God dropped that there. So, and I'd say after bread on the trail hits, at some point you go to work. So as soon as that building was given to us, then the next 10 months was just 12 hours a day doing renovation. But even then I had no idea that this would become what it was becoming. I wasn't thinking Kingdom ecosystem. I wasn't thinking Brave Cities. I did not know Taylor at that point. I didn't know how to do coffee. I didn't know how to do any food or restaurant, but we knew that we would create some type of a multi-use sort of place where people could connect and at least get a cup of coffee. So that was the original start.
Backtrack that. So there's a lot of I'm just putting myself in the shoes of someone hearing this for the first time going, okay, there's some question marks in your story here. So that initial gas station you're trying to buy, what's on your mind? So you're like, what are you envisioning at that point then?
Yeah, honestly, I was thinking this will be a great way to just meet some people in that are real Altonians in the business sector.
So you're going to run a gas station?
Well, it was actually just going to be, I was just going to make a coffee shop.
Okay.
Probably a plunger pot, Folgers, and I pour it into a plunger pot, and then I just sit there and at least have coffee for myself, maybe meet a few locals.
Yep.
But I offered the guy 20 grand. I thought it'd take me another 20 to get up and running. So it wasn't going to be a big risk, but it was more about the initial connecting, getting to know the city.
Then you go home and you guys have a conversation, like, let's chill, let's just let it be. But a couple hours later, you get this phone call. So you say, it's a guy I didn't really know, and we're offered a building. So
yeah,
that's an amazing turn of events. But two, like, how does that happen? And my hunch is, and you can answer this, there's backstory to like things you've done or reputation or something leads to this phone call, right? Like, because you hear the story and go, well, until my phone rings and someone comes and offers me a building, like you know what I mean? Like on the hearer side of that, tell me more about that. What happened?
Yeah. I did ask the guy that gave me the building, did you know of my persona when you called me? And he claims he didn't. So who knows? I will say this though, some things that were like Taylor was sharing, the personal journey. I was in a different kind of personal journey. I was so tired. I was actually telling the Lord, like, I'll do anything you want us to do. I remember saying that over and over. So I was giving him invitation, like, please. So I think there's something real there about an honest, that consistent talk you have with the Lord, where you don't bring him your ideas. I was so tired, I had no ideas. In fact, I remember telling him, I don't really want to do anything unless I see the Father like revealing it. So I would tell him, you're gonna have to bring it to me. That was so for 5 months we were here before that happened. And I would just walk downtown, and that was a prayer. God, you have to bring it to me, because I don't, whatever. I'd say the coffee shop was Hugh Halter being Hugh Halter, getting bored, going, I'm gonna like make something happen.
Yeah, but let me throw a couple things in, John, and then I want you to share some. I think that the reason stories are so important is because they can illuminate the ignorance of who we really are. If you press into the story deeper, if you keep asking the questions that you're asking, you're typically going to find from people an inability to map this out well. And so I think of this passage that to me is appropriate for this conversation. The eyes of the Lord look all over the earth for a heart that's his, or that he can strengthen. I don't think he's looking for this amazing strategy. I don't think that he's looking for, someone who's well-versed and well-trained in entrepreneurial incubation or systems shifting. I think he's looking for those things. Help a ton, by the way. If you have those abilities along with the heart that's God's, man, I think my wife and I would be a lot further on this journey if I would have been better at business when we started. She's the one that's trained in business, and so it's helped us tremendously. But I don't think that's what he's looking for. So the reason I say that is he does give these breadcrumbs along the trail. He wants us to bend down and pick them up. I think God is real. I think that he guides his people, but I also think that he's pretty infatuated with our dependence on him and with our willingness to kind of throw our hands up and say, I don't know what to do next, but I'm yours. So I also think he really likes this posture of, I don't have anything to offer. I don't know what that is. It reminds me of like some of the Beatitudes, like blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, like this posture of I don't bring a lot to the table, but I do bring, an obsession with you. So oftentimes, especially in the world that we live in, leaders, quote unquote leaders, are constantly looking for a formula. They're looking for like the 5 steps to build a brave city in their context. And I think we do want to help. That's why we're writing this book and why we're discussing these gray papers. But the reality is the primary step is that heart piece that is almost impossible to architect. It just has to be there because your heart is pure and you're there. So yeah, I'm going to flip to the interviewer position and maybe ask for you to share a portion of that too. What kind of from your out of body experience, what 20 years ago to now, what kind of brought you to this kingdom ecosystem conversation?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I was actually going to take your lead a little bit and go back to like the very origin. For those listening that don't know this, my out of body experience was probably 30 something years ago now. But I in college one night, no, I couldn't have been 30. I'm not that old. 20
I was
years
right.
ago. Yeah. 20 years ago. What'd you say? Is that what you said? Okay, you were right. I'm bad with timelines, but one night in college, ate a bunch of acid and had a religious experience. I mean, I met God on LSD and was forever changed. Now I should say 2 years before that, I was in a head-on car accident my senior year in high school. I smashed every bone in my face. So a lot of people will see I had this big scar. They basically did a face-off surgery, all metal plating, whatever. That accident in my senior year was a big deal to me. So I was raised Catholic because I'm Irish. So that just means you're Catholic. Like when grandma comes to town, we go to church or whatever. But when my car accident happened, there was a lot of people that wanted to come in and like pray for me and say, God had a purpose for saving you. And, blah, 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 all these, what seemed to me very trite words meant to be encouraging, but having quite the opposite impact. And for me, that would have been the first time I'd say I acknowledged maybe the existence of God, but I think it was so that I had somewhere to point my middle fingers. Like I needed someone to blame, like, and you let this happen to me, even though I was the one that was drinking and driving. I was the one acting crazy. I was the whatever, did all that. But then 2-point-something years later, when I had this experience in college, it was as if I believe in fully to this day, I met God on LSD and God said, listen, that's, this is a truncated version of this, but effectively said, I love you. And this is what it took to get through to you. And by the way, you needed to go through all of this pain and suffering because you're going to need to be able to empathize and sympathize with people who are in pain. And so there's this is like, you've got a toolbox now of suffering that you're going to take with you. But I came out of that sobered up off that experience, feeling like I had been commissioned even, but this was the origin story of my kind of like Christian faith. And I didn't know where to go. Right. So I remember I called my mom because my mom was praying and faithful and she listened to terrible music. So all those things together was like, she must be a Christian. And so I called my mom and didn't tell her why I made this decision and tell her about the acid trip. She knows now, it's public now, but I said, hey mom, I'm going to follow Jesus. And she was ecstatic and pray with me on the phone and whatever. Well, I actually met with a buddy that I had been in a fight with earlier in the week. It was like my best friend, and I went to his house and there was a Bible open on the ground, which is very out of character, and a bunch of notes. And I was like, bro, are you reading the Bible? And he's like, kicked it shut. And he's like, I was looking at it. And I was like, yo, I've been looking at it too, because this had just happened to me like a week earlier. And I pulled this little Gideon's pocket Bible I had picked up from someone on campus out of my pocket. I was like, I have so many questions. And he's like, let me tell you what happened to me. And I was like, I want to tell you what happened to me. And he told a very similar story to what happened to me with LSD, happened to him. We believe possibly the same night. It was the week before.
How do we use this to like help people in Jesus? And
yeah,
there was a group of hippies back then,
right? Not necessarily prescriptive.
Well, that's exactly it. So it's like, yeah, someone's going to call and tell you got a building, but same thing. Like, this is what, and to me, it was like very much like I read Paul's story and I'm like, this is kind of how it happened to me. Well, turns out my best friend had a very similar experience on ecstasy about a week earlier. And so we shook on it. We said, are you serious? Are you going to follow Jesus? I am too. Deal. We shake on it. So he and I start having this really misinformed Bible study where we would just read the Bible and no one really was there to tell us we don't actually do any of that stuff. So we would read stuff and say, like, I don't know, bear fruit in keeping with repentance. If you have 2 jackets, give to someone who has none. And we're like, all right, cool. Do you have an extra jacket? Go get it. Let's find someone that doesn't have one and let's give it to them. Like, we'll just go do this. So for about a year, he and I were doing this. I tell you all that backstory because I actually think my story is a little different. I didn't come up in church. I mean, whatever. And so about a year in, one night I was at his house and I was hungry, and he had a 2-story house. I want to go downstairs and get some food. And there's a bunch of people downstairs. Like, man, just wait. They always got people over here on Wednesdays, whatever. Like, and I'm like, no, and I basically grew up in this dude's house. I'm hungry. I'll keep it down. I'm just going to go down and get something out of the fridge. I'll be back. So I sneak down there, try to walk through their meeting. And then I'm getting stuff out of the fridge and I come back up. I'm like, bro, do you know they're studying the Bible down there? Like, that's what they're doing. So he and I have been doing this for like a year upstairs. And he's like, that's what they do? Like, has no clue that his parents have a Wednesday night home group, basically meeting there, studying the Bible, all gray haired folks. And so I said, hey, I want to join them. And he's like, all right, I'll come. So we asked, can we jump in with y'all? We did. It was awesome. Loved it. And learned a ton. It was great having people that have actually like read this stuff before, learned some history. Like, we were just pulling random, doing our best with this stuff. Well, eventually they said, hey, we go to this church, this non-denominational church we're all part of. We go there on Sunday mornings. You guys should join us. And so I think we'd been in part of this group for a few months at that point, but we went. And I will say I hated it immediately. So I remember going in and thinking, what does this have anything to do with anything we've read or talked about? Like, I don't understand what we're doing here. We just sing these songs. They're terrible. I don't know what this has to do with Jesus other than his name is in these songs. Right. But then at the same time, for me, I was like, I think if I'm here going, what would Jesus do? Which I think is a good, important question to ask. And I was like, I think maybe he'd fashion a whip. I think maybe he would kick that dude's table over. And I was like, oh, I can't do this. Actually, I need to like get out of here because I'm going to end up in jail for going to church. Right. So like for me, there was this very early sense that something was really wrong with this activity. But I just assumed it was me. Like, everyone agrees. They all smile. It was a great service, great sermon. We're going to go to, Village Inn afterwards, whatever. It was like the same deal every week. So I kept going. I just kept going. And I was like, it's my problem. I have a bad attitude. I need to chill out and like be more Christian. And that's probably all true, by the way. So then eventually I was there probably a couple years at this point. And one day they started a building campaign where they were going to raise $3 million for some big, and I did not at this point have all these convictions about the poor and economics and ecosystem and none of this. I just thought, I'll have no part in that. I want no part of that. And by the way, this is just I never loved Christian music. There was one song I liked. It was called I Can Only Imagine. And I was like, that's a good song right there. And guess what? They used that song as the theme song for their Capitol campaign. And so forever, the one song that I liked is like now the $3 million fundraiser song for when I had to like exodus the church, whatever. So and the story goes on, but I will say that my initial move with like what you were calling like the Christian industrial complex or the church as professionalized in practice seem really out of touch with or unaffiliated or irrelevant to maybe the life and teaching of Jesus that I had understood. So I'll just like say, then I got plugged in with like para-church stuff. So I got really into InterVarsity. One, because I was at college and I went to a Bible study. And at the end of it, they said, what should we do? And I was like, what do you mean? What should we do? They're like, well, we read this. We should probably do something about it. And I was like, I'm in with these people. These are my people. Right. And so that would fast forward. Eventually that same group would eventually become a bunch of who started the underground network here in Tampa that we talked about last times, what connected us with you guys and like realizing, hey, we're not the only ones. There's others out there. But for me, I think that I want to say that that initial inkling is a little bit back to like some LSD and then going to church maybe a little too late. I had read the Bible maybe a little too long.
To finish it, that's perfect. To finish it, was there a moment or a situation in that journey as you started to kind of become more connected to something that dealt with covenant? So let's say a big part that's missing in anyone's journey, like yours, like mine, when I was young, is covenant.
Yep.
So when you stepped into the underground story, or really you were kind of part of starting that story. As you were part of starting that story, you were also a part of covenant. You still are 20 years later.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question.
From that time period forward, was there a moment that you said,
I get it.
The city conversation, like the ecosystem, not in the way it's being used a lot, but the actual economy of.
So I'm gonna tell you, and I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'm gonna try to make this quick, but like, I think I get what you're asking. And I would say the initial thing there was when I stopped going to churches and this and that. And I don't know where this falls in the timeline with InterVarsity, but I was really interested in application. And I believe it was with InterVarsity. There was a local church here in Tampa that I was like, I'm not going to any services or I don't want anything to do with that. But they have a meal for the homeless on, I don't know, Thursday night or whatever it was at the time. And I was like, hey, that sounds like something I've read about. I'll go to that. So I joined the church for that. And when I got there, they had a van out back and they were packing the van with to-go boxes. And I remember it was like Christmas time. So I had like some blankets I'd picked up from like a Goodwill. And I said, hey, can I go with the van instead of staying here? And they're like, yeah, because the van basically goes out to people that can't get here, take them food, blankets, whatever. So I went with them. And I remember going in this alley. Like I know where it is now, but I had no clue where I was. I was super nervous. They took me to this dark behind an alley downtown. I was walking down this alley because everyone's split up to different areas. I was alone walking down this alley. It was pitch black, reeked of urine. And I remember saying, hey, is there anyone back here? And there was a guy that said, I'm here. And I handed this dude some food, super awkwardly, like squatted down next to him, didn't know what to do, just said, I don't know. I don't want to just hand it to him, walk off. So it's like, hey man, talk to me. Tell me your story, whatever. Well, the reason I'm telling you this story is I think that it is. So I went home that night and I was ruined, man. I was like, this beautiful brother is laying in an alley, reeks of urine, hoping someone comes by with food. And that has haunted me ever since. Like the conviction was, I don't want to live in a world that works this way or doesn't work for our brothers and sisters like this dude that I just met, who I had a ton in common with, who had a beautiful story. And the reason I'm saying that is because that haunting, I think, became something like conviction, which became something like marrying a problem, which then mapped to a community of people committed to addressing those problems. And I do think the question of covenant is the right question for someone that's like the prophetic among us, because it's like, this is wrong. Fashion a whip, burn it down, whatever. But it's like, yeah, but what's the place of like, I'm not leaving and I'm walking with these folks. But I actually do think at some base level, it was like there's a problem here. There's work to be done. And like a conviction around that and a commitment to that. And then the covenantal community grew around shoulder to shoulder work, maybe around that calling or conviction. Hopefully that helps address that a little bit.
Let me throw some at you. I say we go round 2 on this topic of like just how we get moving Next one is called The Haunting. Okay. And let's talk about the stuff that just, gets in there. But because this is gray papers, we're supposed to figure out some learnings from this. Okay. So
good.
I'm just writing down a few thoughts. You guys fill it in. But listening to all of us, number one, nobody initiated the original story. Doesn't sound like. There was some type of something wasn't okay. So there was a longing in the heart. Maybe that's number one. Number two is that God initiated something. So I think we have to hold space and not ever think that what we end up doing is our idea. Like literally, I can't think of any good thing I've done that literally I go, oh, now looking back, I go, oh yeah, I thought that up. So we have to recognize God wants to initiate all over the world, in every neighborhood, in every city. Like it's not up to you to be the ultimate creative in your city. Okay. Maybe third, related to those two, is like we should honor where we've come from. There should be a humility, because in all of our settings, the local church expression in any form, crappy form, decent form, family form, whatever, seemed to, even you getting a chance to meet with a homeless guy on the street was because some church was doing, what we might look back now and go, that's more programmatic, but it helped you find.
And that initial Bible study was huge as well. It would move beyond the two of us in his room.
Totally. So I think none of us should go out and be dicks, literally. Like we should be humble and be thankful.
I hear you, Hugh.
For any story that's happened. Seemed like number 4 was that we all did go. At some point, you just go. You gotta, like you can only study it for so long. There is some step of faith. It seemed like then after that, you're finding others. You found Tampa Underground. I found Taylor. It seemed maybe that's the one strategy point, is try to find people that are doing things that sort of, I guess, ignite your heart at least. Wouldn't hurt to go spend a day or two with them. And then maybe 5th, we start to get at the issues that are haunting us that we might eventually commit our whole lives to. That's why I think we should just go a whole session just on the things that haunt us that kind of keep us in the game.
Yeah. I love
so good.
Yeah. I love the haunting thing. So last thing for today, maybe think about Jesus being described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. What we want, when you saw that man in the alley, you saw a world that you hated and that haunted you. I would say we're still haunted by that world. In fact, I would say, realistically, 23 years in now, I've been trying to change that world only to realize that it's worse than it was 23 years ago. So that helps me understand and even maybe identify with this God that I follow that was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And that to me is the conclusion, or the kind of the concise idea of why we're doing what we're doing. Is we're trying to build little worlds, little cities that are better, where that man in the alley, he has a seat at the table now. We have conceded, and I don't think it's a giving up, it's an understanding that this world cannot be changed. This world as we know it is what it is. It's fallen, if you will. It's kind of, it has a timeline, but we can build a better city everywhere that we are, a little world where there are seats at the table, where there is covenant, where there is grace upon grace. And that's what has kept us going. Because if you set on this journey to try to change the world, it is inevitable that you're going to hit a wall at some point when you realize, like Mother Teresa did, that it's worse than when I started. Unless you understand that you've built a little small city in your context where the poor are welcome, where the lonely find families, where laughter and levity and grace can be offered to the most vile of us. And all the things that we long for are available in that little world.
I love this. Guys, thank you so much for just taking some time to share the initial piece of your story. Obviously, we'll circle back here again soon and kind of pick up and continue the journey. But I think this is and Hugh, great job on like really pulling those points together. I'm actually wildly impressed with your ability to do that.
I'm the intellect of the group. We all know that.
Obvious. Amen.
All right.
We did it. All right, brother.